Hi there, welcome to Glen Talks, where we speak all things in the world of business and the local community. We offer inclusive insights and exclusive experiences. Today's guest is a champion for change and social justice advocate in political circles and in the labor movement. Kassandra Cordero, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I was really happy to receive the invitation. I'm grateful to be here.
You have such a strong history and just a real heart for the heart work of social justice. Can you kind of share a little bit about your career path and what powered you up to stand up for others?
I would have to say that my passion for social justice and systems change came at a really young age. I grew up in foster care under the care of the Ministry of Children and Family Development here in BC, and I was placed into a white foster home, and the majority of my social workers who supported me over the years were also white. And the dynamics, the experiences that come with living through those dynamics really got me interested in systems change and with a social justice lens. And then if you fast forward to when I was 19 years old, I was working at the IGA on Burrard and Smythe. And there were, again, some systemic issues of inequity in the workplace. And that's what sparked organizing drives with UFCW 1518. I became involved at the very end of that organizing drive, right before our vote for certification. And then we had a member of our bargaining committee obtain other employment throughout that process. And she actually tapped me on the shoulder and asked me if I'd be interested in becoming part of the bargaining committee. And I think that's when I was really able to put my passion for systems change, passion for social justice into action in a way that created a lasting impact for me, for my colleagues, and certainly started my path in the union and organized labor world.
And can you share a little bit about some of the work that you have done in terms of bringing groups together and being able to lead some change?
Yeah, I think doing equity and human rights work in BC's labor movement and also doing some organizing work in around racial justice in political spaces has really involved bringing people who might not always agree with each other to the table to find a common path forward towards an objective. And I say that and it sounds like a really easy concept, but when you get people with different lived experiences at the table who have all faced some sort of oppression in their lifetime, it can be a real challenge and a real exercise to get people to agree on a next step forward and on prioritization of human rights and equity issues. And also can be a bit of a challenge, a rewarding challenge, but a challenge nonetheless to get people to really understand each other's experiences on a deep level.
And a lot of the themes that come out that we hear from people is, what it is to be an ally. So in terms of leadership, in anti-racism, particularly leaders that don't embody the same look and feel or have the same lived experience that want to be allies. What does that look up for them?
Honestly, that's a great question. I think as leaders, there can be a pressure to always have the identity of the organization as our own identity. And I really encourage leaders, especially those who don't identify as Indigenous, Black, or racialized, who are trying to show up for anti-racism or to be anti-racist. I really encourage them to forget everything they've ever learned about organizational identity and organizational behavior and just give themselves the permission to show up as human and to also see the other folks who do identify as Indigenous, Black, and racialized, listen to them, see them as their kin, see them as just people who are trying to achieve collective liberation in our movement, in our communities, in broader society, and see them as family and not be afraid, right? I think some of the most difficult moments that I've faced in my work have been with leaders who, when I try to call them in or when I try to let them know that maybe the way that they're showing up has been a bit harmful and give them tips on how to show up better, they close themselves off, or even worse, sometimes lash back out at me as if I've hurt them somehow by letting them know that they've been harmful. I think giving themselves the permission to not be perfect and understanding that if Indigenous, Black, and racialized people are reaching out to you as a leader to let you know that you've caused harm, it's because they care about the relationship. They care about you as a person. They want to keep interacting with you and having a working relationship with you. When people are done and there's no desire to continue a working relationship, people aren't going to come to you with feedback because they will have already written you off and closed the door and said, you know what, I'm not getting anywhere with this person. I'm done.
Yeah, it's a hard topic when it comes to some of that finer tuned interpersonal communication and knowing how to respond while being respectful. And I think maybe that's kind of some hold up for some people. Do you have any tips for leaders for being able to navigate this? Or
absolutely. I know throughout my working life and even in my personal friendships, there have been moments where I've been called upon to do better. And I am such a socially anxious human, and I'm always afraid of messing up or doing the wrong thing. And so I created a 4-point formula for myself that I can work through in the moment fairly quickly. And it's pretty easy to remember. I say acknowledge, and then validate, and then mitigate, and then co-create. So the acknowledgement is saying to the person, absolutely, I'm not going to gaslight you. I recognize that this happened. Thank you for pointing it out to me. The validate is your feelings are absolutely valid in this moment. I understand why you feel the way you feel, and I'm not here to refute that. The mitigating is what I can do, what I can commit to you in the moment to make sure that the behavior stops. And so a way that might look is, you know what, you're absolutely right. I had no idea that that term actually carried that connotation, and I will stop using it in the future. And then the co-create is kind of the best part. And again, this comes with the caveat that the person has to be willing to go down that road with you, but I would invite the person to be in the driver's seat with me. And how can we co-create a reality where this doesn't happen anymore, or significantly less of it happens? And so maybe it's a conversation that we have at the beginning of a next committee meeting that says, hey, you know, some of you might remember that this moment happened the last time we were together, and we just wanted to let folks know that we're adopting this new practice. We're not using this term anymore, and here's the reasons why. And here's some terms that we can use instead of that. So again, walking through that, it's acknowledging first and foremost, validate, mitigate, co-create.
So from some of your experiences and the work that you do, what are some of your benchmarks for measuring success with this?
That's, again, not totally the same in every situation, but I look for things like, if it's an organizational setting, who's showing up to the table? Do they feel safe to speak? Are they actively engaging in meetings, who's engaging in the meetings. And of the people who are engaging or speaking in meetings and contributing, are those folks of a certain demographic? Are there folks who are not speaking in meetings that all share a certain characteristic? And have we checked in with those folks to see if there's ways in which we could structure our meetings that would be more friendly for them or feel more safe for them to make more contributions? I would also say that in group settings, when people feel safe and when they feel included, they will contribute more, whether it's, writing emails or writing messages that come to us after a meeting, or whether it's their confidence to put up their hand in a meeting and speak, or even just who shows up at meetings, right? Like I do some organizing around racial justice in institutional spaces that are highly political. And for a while, we didn't have people showing up to meetings because I think there was a feeling of disenfranchisement in the group. And once we started really showing people through our committee reports and through the work that we were doing and through the organizing work, quite frankly, that myself and other leaders in the committee were doing to reach out to people, invite them to come to meetings, to remind them that their presence is wanted, to really embrace them. We noticed that our committee meeting attendance was coming up again. And so I think the highest standard that I hold myself to is, how do people feel at the end of the meeting? And when I talk about how people feel, I'm talking about people who are marginalized, people who live at the intersect of race, indigeneity, ability, sexual orientation, and gender identity. How did those folks feel at the end of the meeting? Because we already know how folks who don't identify in those groups feel, right? Everything is centered around the folks that don't identify in those groups. And I want to know how the people who are most marginalized feel. And it's an uncomfortable benchmark, I think, for a lot of institutions because they have trouble measuring it in ways that don't involve asking for people's feedback directly and individually. But I think there are ways in which we can see the evidence of that play out in our institutional spaces.
So with traditional business, there's like a regular flow, and there's been it's kind of the new kind of buzzword is to have the diversity and bringing those seats to the table. And there's been a conscious effort by a lot of businesses, and it's creating space at the table, but for some, they kind of feel like it's just a reserved seat at the table. And is there ways that organizations can be a little bit more culturally mindful for these people, not only just having that seat for them, but to be able to create that safe space for them? Do you have any tips?
Yeah, I think when I hear buzzwords like diversity, I think, oh, gee, there is a word that was created as a signal for a certain type of organization, or it was created as a signal to virtue signal inclusivity somehow. Honestly, to me, it matters less what the term is that is used by the organization. It matters a lot more what the practice is behind it. That being said, I think that words like equity, justice, diversity, decolonization, inclusion, I think all of those can become buzzwords, and they can become quite empty and like a virtue signal if there isn't the proper resource of time and support and finances and training, quite frankly, to go behind that. So I think the real ways in which organizations or companies, whether they be in labor, in politics, in corporate sectors, is really to put the training in place, give people opportunities to learn in brave spaces. I think we need to put real policy into place within organizations. And so sometimes that might mean taking a look at constitutions that might have existed for almost 100 years and seeing how we can evolve those documents to better reflect the needs of a population right now. I think if you take the labor movement as an example, the labor movement in its current context was created in the early 1900s, right? And it was created to respond to the needs of the proletariat of the day. So the marginalized, working class, poor needed a way to stand up for better rights and better working conditions, occupational health and safety in the workplace during the Industrial Revolution. And really that workforce was fairly homogenous at the time and was created by the folks who were in that workplace demographic at the time. The reality is that now the proletariat looks far different than what it did in the early 1900s. So the workforce is diversifying at an increasing rate. And I think that comes from immigration trends. You know, people who want to migrate here for a better life for their families are increasingly browner and increasingly maybe not English speaking as their primary language. And culturally, they're much more diverse, right? So, you know, myself, I have South Asian and Latin background, and we're seeing tons of people who have different cultural backgrounds entering the workforce. And we need to be able to show up for them. We need to be able to make sure that it's them at the table making the decisions about what the working conditions and benefits and even holidays need to be as the new working proletariat, right? So I think we need to be ever responding and ever diversifying along with the workforce that we're trying to represent in labor. Otherwise, we become irrelevant. And, you know, what does that mean for the longevity and the viability of our movement moving forward? Do we then get replaced by another movement, or do we create a vacuum where corporations can just run completely unfettered and unchallenged in any kind of organizational way?
Mm-hmm. And so you shared like holidays as an example. Can you share some other policies or ways that we can challenge our traditional kind of workflows that we have with in British Columbia and some of our boardrooms or in some of our workplaces? What are some of the other things that we need to consider to be more welcoming for other people and to make them feel supported?
Yeah, I think holidays, I think days of recognition, Indigenous practices around end of life ceremony for community members, and what that means not only in the moment, but also a year from then, or different cultural practices that people have. What does it mean to hold meetings during Eid, for example? Mm-hmm. And what are some of the cultural mindfulness we can embody when it comes to holding workspace or holding engagement space during those periods when people are traditionally in a very like spiritual place and, you know, might be fasting and might not be able to show up during daytime activities in the same way as they would during other parts of the year. I think the other thing that I would just speak to around how we can be more inclusive of workers is language justice. And, this is something I really learned deeply from a colleague and a friend. Her name's Ria Aurora. She really taught me a lot about what it means for workers to be able to access contract language, legislation, translations on fact sheets about what their rights are that are provided by the provincial government under the Employment Standards Branch websites. Having access to that kind of information in the language that they feel most comfortable in makes a huge difference. And I think working with migrant workers in BC, specifically Spanish-speaking migrant workers, we've come into many situations that have been exacerbated because we haven't had translation ability at the Employment Standards Branch level, or we haven't had, even amongst our own volunteers that work with these migrant workers, haven't had the language capacity to respond to their needs. And some of them have been brought over on LMIAs or labor market impact assessments that were written in English. And for Spanish-speaking workers, that's a barrier. And then for workers who are being brought from communities that are Indigenous in Latin America and who maybe don't speak Spanish, but speak their Indigenous dialect, it's even more of a challenge to be able to serve these workers in the language that they need access to. And so if a worker is good enough to come here, and provide their labor for us, surely the least we could do is translate the documents that govern their working relationship for them in the language that they need access to.
And is there specific resources, associations, or websites that we're able to help drive people to that have some resources available, both for people that have questions on this, how to help build their own inclusive programs, and where can we find those?
For sure. So I would suggest for the labor movement, connect with the BC Federation of Labor. I know that's where I work as my day job. We're always happy to help folks. Outside of the labor movement, there are a ton of amazing consultants that are doing this work. And so Salam Debs, for example, based out of Ontario, is phenomenal. Rhiannon Bennett at Hummingbirds Rising Consulting, Elaine Alec at Nextmist, Natasha Toney at Elevate Inclusion Strategies. And there are, a number of other resources that are available to help folks.
So the idea of being an ally is not something that you can just pick up and put on like a badge. It takes a lot of hard, conscious work. You have to consciously plan to be empathetic, keep that mind for that audience, to be supportive, to continuously show up. How can we continue to push that dial for those of us that are wanting to really be those allies and to be those advocates for change?
Yeah. Thank you, by the way, for recognizing off the bat that ally is not a title that you can pick up like a badge and put it on yourself. Ally is a term of respect that comes from the communities that you're engaging with, whether you claim those communities or they claim you. Allyship is really a spirit that's embodied, and when community recognizes it in you, that's a beautiful thing. I think the best ways where I've seen people embody allyship is when they are actively checking in with me, respecting my agency, saying, Cass, how can I support you in this meeting coming up? Or when they choose to respond to me, not out of a place of fragility and saying, how dare you call me a racist, but out of a place of curiosity and humility and consistently placing themselves in the position of a student and a lifelong learner. I think that's where the big moments of winning happen. And sometimes when things are a little more intense and when leaders are called upon to put themselves in some sort of a challenging spot to do the right thing. I think right now we see too many leaders who are not leading for the organization that they're currently entrusted with, and they're not leading for the most marginalized people within that organization. In fact, they're leading to silence those people, and they're leading to solidify their electability for their next term, whatever that might be. I think those moments where leaders stand up to their co-leaders and say, I recognize that this is not a politically popular position to take, but it's the right position to take. And so I'm taking it in solidarity with those who are more marginalized than myself, because I believe in our collective liberation.
What would be a bit of a future vision for you? What can be the future of us being able to think outside of ourselves and start really embodying our respect for others? And I think tying back to recognizing different cultures, but also recognizing our workplace culture, while it's very fragile in its own sense, how do we begin to shape that and challenge that and realize that it's okay if we may be sacrificing a little bit in terms of numbers and points, but we're realizing that we're engaging these workers that we haven't heard from before, and we're just tapping into a whole new realm and sphere of an ability for us to grow as an organization and think beyond what our traditional sense is.
Fundamentally, it comes from inner work. And I know that might sound counterintuitive, but if a leader can really work on how they show up, I consider myself a leader as well. I lead in different spaces, and I'm actually in leadership studies at the university that I'm currently finishing my degree in. And I think the beautiful gift that process has given me is embodying leadership as an internal journey rather than necessarily an external force or application of force. And what I mean by that is, as I have done the work to give myself the tools to show up in a helpful way through my anxiety, through my embarrassment, through whatever the situation is that might be going down in the meeting or on the conference floor or whatever the case may be, the better I've been able to show up for my colleagues, for committee members who might be counting on me, for constituent members, for community members who might not have felt like they've had access to me in the past, or that they've had access to the spaces that I exist within in the past. The more that I can do my inner work and build my own inner confidence and strength, the more I'm able to look at people who might be more marginalized than me, who might look a bit different than me, who might have different lived experiences than me, less as threats and more as my strengths. They complement what I bring to the table, and I might be able to move something forward on my own. But when I join forces with all of the people whose voices maybe haven't been heard in our respective institutions or movements, we become unstoppable. And then we truly are joining forces together toward, again, our collective liberation, because that's what it is at the end of the day, right? We want to be free from oppression, so that we can all thrive. Everybody deserves to thrive. And right now, not everybody is thriving. We need to fix that.
And that change doesn't happen unless we do the hard work. No one says it was going to be easy. It's going to be very challenging. So who are Cassandra's allies? Who have been some of your mentors and the people that have shown up for you to help you stand up for others?
Oh my goodness. I think starting from a very young age, I think Mrs. McLeod, my grade 7 teacher at Cougar Canyon Elementary, was...
Shout out.
Yes. She was one of my early femtors. I think in the labor movement, Joey Hartman, who used to be the president of the Vancouver and District Labor Council, really showed up for me as an ally. I think in recent years, people like Heather Stoutenberg, who is the provincial director of the BC NDP, has shown up as a real femtor. And Natasha Toney from Elevate has been an incredible mentor, femtor to me in so many ways. Shani Prasad from BCTF has been a phenomenal mentor. Ria Aurora has been an amazing mentor. And one of my newest mentors who's been just a breath of fresh air to be able to work with is Harminder Singh Cayley. He's our Secretary Treasurer at the BC Fed, and he is somebody who truly leads with a worker's spirit and truly leads with the objective of working toward our collective liberation.
Love it. Is there any books or good reads that you can recommend for anybody that really wants to do the hard work?
Oh gosh, so many. There's How to Be Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi. There's To Do This, or We Do This Till We Free Us by Miriam Cavo. And I mentioned Shani earlier. This was a book club book that the Anti-Oppression Educators Collective under Shani's leadership took on. And that's a really great book for people who are interested in the abolitionist movement, but also interested in how to be anti-racist in a community. I think another one of my favorite books that I just read recently is by Starhawk, and it's called The Fifth Sacred Thing. And it's not an equity book per se, but it is a book that weaves in collective action, collective liberation. It's a utopian dystopian contrast kind of novel, and it talks about race relations in almost like a post-race, in a post-race context, but also with that contrast of what it looks like for folks who are still living in racial segregation. It's an older book. I think it was written in the 70s, but I just finished it and felt so seen.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. I'm going to look that one up. We have for our next segment, we're going to finish off a little bit of a fun rapid fire. Okay. So it's going to be anything from like one word to one sentence kind of answers for us to kind of get to know you better, kind of poke and prod and do a little bit more in-depth, kind of off the cuff to see what's percolating inside your Cassandra brain.
Oh, that could be dangerous.
So are you an early bird or a night owl?
Night owl.
Okay. And what's your guilty pleasure snack?
Ooh, salt and vinegar or all dressed chips.
What is a hidden super talent that you have that people might not know that you have?
I mean, I like to sing. I don't know if that's a super talent, though.
It is a super talent, yes. If you can have dinner with any figure, who would it be?
Nelson Mandela.
And what's your favorite way to unwind after a long day?
It depends on the day. Either vegging in front of the television or reading a book.
One thing off your long bucket list.
Travel to Chile and study with my indigenous community there. Learn Mapuzungun and learn our cosmovision.
Beautiful. If you could solve one global issue overnight, what would it be?
Colonial and imperial violence.
Beaches or mountains?
Mountains and beaches. Both. I want both.
That's why you're in BC. Favorite vacation spot in BC?
Sunshine Coast.
And if you could live anywhere but here, where would it be?
Sunshine Coast.
Thank you so much for joining us, Cassandra. I have a wonderful gift for you. Just one thing that we do for all of our guests. Thank you so much for joining us. And every time I talk to you, it's just such a breath of fresh air. And I just learn so much more about you, about my community, and about myself, and being able to challenge myself and my personal growth. So thank you so much for joining us today. And I'd like to show you this gift.
Oh, thank you.
So the small token of our appreciation, we just really wanted to present to you our little gift. And I just really want to thank you again for joining us. So
this is gorgeous. Thank you.
So is there anything that you wanted to lead us off with, or is there anything that you're kind of feeling on your heart that you'd like to say, or?
I just thank you. You know, I think it takes a certain level of bravery to even decide that you're going to watch this podcast or listen to it or whatever the case may be. And so if you've spent the time with us today, thank you, and reach out. You know, I'm happy to have conversations with anybody who might feel like they could use a helping hand through this journey. It's all a journey, and we're on it together, and we're all lifelong learners, just helping each other along.
Awesome. Thank you. That's all we have for today's show. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and please tune in next time, and we look forward to bringing you more content. Take care.